Welcome to Wine Soundtrack South Africa. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Morena Kalo, and today I'm joining Christo from Riche Wines. Christo, a very warm welcome. Can you please tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Morena. And thanks for having me on the show. It's nice to actually sit and chat with you today. Well, I'm the owner, we co-owner and winemaker for Riche Wines. We're a family business based in Stellenbosch. And we're basically running the operation with my sister and my cousin are involved, and we've taken over from my dad quite a few years ago already.
Mm-hmm. And how many hectares of vines are you farming at the moment?
So we're probably working with about 15 hectares of vines, but they're spaced out throughout the whole of Stellenbosch. So we have sites up on the Simmelsberg Mountain, Jonkershoek, Helderberg on the northern side, as well as down here where the winery is close to the ocean, kind of Helderberg coastal area.
Mm-hmm. And roughly how many cases of wine do you produce annually?
Cases are around 10,000 of six. It's about 12,000 of six. Yeah. No.
Okay, Chris, so I know that you are very well known for a specific kind of wine, and that being, of course, Stellenbosch Cabernet, but there's a little bit more to it. Tell me a little bit more about where your focus lies, what your ethos is in terms of winemaking, and what you do, what you really do so very well.
Well, it's actually quite a long journey, but we can get more into that as we're moving through the afternoon. But basically, we love Cabernet, and we firmly believe that the more Cabernet we add to a wine, the better it gets. And especially if you're based in Stellenbosch, we have a multitude of sites that's ideal for Cabernets. We've got this beautiful cooling impact coming from the ocean. We've got more than sufficient sunlight to ripen it properly. So really for us, it's all about finding these little micro pockets, unique sites and terroirs that we can work with, and then blending those all together into two final wines, which is our Reserve Cabernet and our Straight Cab. Both are 100% Cabernets, but they are blends. They've got representation from all our different wards, and it's really about finding those nuances and using them as my blending components into the final wines that we work with.
And I know you have a very special place in your heart for Stellenbosch, in particular when it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon. Why is that?
Well, firstly, I grew up here. So it's been my home for the last 40 years. It's a beautiful little town. I mean, for those who haven't traveled here yet, it's we on the southern border is right on the ocean. We've got a mountain backdrop to the east, and every day we stand on these mountain slopes and look at the sunset. The sunset straight over Table Mountain, which is one of the eight natural wonders of the world. So it's this spectacular scenery that we're working off. And that combination of factors and the way it plays out within our region and just the diversity that we can get is something I'm really passionate about. It's what I love, and we strongly feel that Cabernet can express that. If you look at aspect and how it impacts the wind that moves through our region and the different pockets where the sea breeze can reach to, as well as altitude, which then impacts temperature. Cabernet is the kind of grape that really responds to climatic environments and can showcase those climatic changes, what happens above the soil. Obviously, under the soil is also very important from a water holding capacity, but it can really showcase the topography of a region. And that's what I'm loving about Cabernet and exploring my region with it and seeing how the different mountains, the different wards showcase the same clone and the same variety, but in such different ways.
I think it is really interesting, and terroir-driven wines is really what you guys here at Riche are about. Tell me, at the moment, where can we find your wines outside of South Africa?
Ooh, that's quite a long answer. We have got some wines in Alberta in Canada. There's small droplets going into the US. There's a bit in Brazil. There's a bit in Peru. then UK, Scotland, the whole of Scandinavia, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, Czech Republic. If we go over to the east, we're in Singapore, we're in China, we're in South Korea, we're in Japan, we're in Australia, obviously South Africa, various African countries. So we're quite widely distributed. We don't do a lot of wine, so there's not large volumes going in any direction. But we've got quite a wide footprint, which we've worked hard at. We do want to make sure that there is access to the wines in quite a few countries. And inherently, South Africa, we do a lot of exporting. So the majority of our wine is going export, but our biggest market still remains local.
So, Christo, tell me, you obviously grew up in Stellenbosch, wine family, but is there a memory specific to you where wine kind of made a bit of an impact on you as a person for the first time?
I think I obviously grew up on a wine farm with my father being a winemaker. So it was always there. It was always around me. So there isn't really that specific moment where I think the winemaking process really sunk in. I just kind of gradually moved in that direction. I think the first bottle of wine that really clicked, I was probably 16 years old, and an old diving friend of my dad came to visit. His name was Tabi Gericke, and he made his money. He was an archaeologist, and he made his money salvaging old wrecks around the Cape. And he discovered this big wreck off a Gullis, off the southern tip of Africa. And in any case, by that stage, he was traveling around the world. He was actually a confessed alcoholic, but he only drank great wine. And he ended up pitching up at my dad's house in his old Volkswagen Combi bus, which he slept in. And he brought out this one bottle of wine. It was a bottle of Bordeaux, aged Bordeaux. I can't even remember what it was. But I just remember drinking this bottle of wine, and I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's really what wine for me is all about. And I could see the association of the wines my dad was making versus that. That was kind of my first real international kind of, the pin dropped about what is great wine. And then from there, obviously, there's been many, many great bottles shared.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of great bottles from all around the world, no doubt, are there any not so great bottles that stand out for you from anywhere that you drank and you were so excited to enjoy this, and the disappointment was really real?
Well, am I going to say that live? There's a couple of tricky ones. There's been one very significant New World wine, one of the top rated in the world. I've had it twice now. Both aged examples, and both were horrendous. That just didn't stand the test of time. And these are wines that are going to cost you €1,000 a bottle. There's been a couple of great Napa cabs that have been highly disappointing, just from a stylistic point of view. And at the same time, I've had a couple of bottles that have been absolutely amazing. The Screaming Eagle I had while I was still working at the estate remains one of the best wines I've ever had. I've never seen a wine with a 2-minute finish. And so there's great bottles, and unfortunately there's always bottles that will disappoint you. And the thing about wine is there's a stylistic influence, and what one region or country calls great, another country doesn't. A Australian taste profile is very different from American, is very different from Chilean, is very different from South African. And we all have wines we love. We all have wines we look up to. And if you look up to one direction, then the other one's often going to be much more disappointing than what you thought it would be, and not worth the hype. So, yeah, it does happen often.
Speaking of different countries and taste profiles, is there a country in the world that you think, the people in that country are just so spoiled because they get the best wines, best quality, best everything? Do you think that exists?
You can obviously go and look at France. They've got the history and they've got everything about it. And, everybody knows the French and the arrogance around it. They love their own wines. They talk very highly about their own wines. And for good reasons. It's because they are making some of the best wines in the world. But I think there's so many great pockets throughout the world. And to be able to say that, well, great wine's only from there, well, we all know it's not. there's a lot of spaces where people are blessed with an amazing array of wines at their disposal. I think one of the biggest ones is probably the UK. If you wonder why most of the MWs in the world are coming from the UK, is because they've got access to the world of wines. Where in South Africa we've got 3 MWs, purely because to taste that array of wine just doesn't exist. It's unaffordably expensive because every single bottle you want to taste has to be imported, especially. It's not every Tuesday or Wednesday evening that you go to a tasting with a winemaker for free, as they can in London. So I think definitely the UK has got are extremely spoilt in what they have. But then again, they've been supporting the wine industry. They built Bordeaux to where they are. They built Porto to where they are because of their association and proximity. And good on them. That's why we all love sending wine there. And we love the Brits for drinking our wines.
Absolutely. Long may that continue, for sure. Coming back here to the cellar, what is currently the most expensive wine in the Riche range of wines?
That would be our reserve. So the reserve is very much the flagship. It's the gold standard of what we do, but it's also the main focus of what we do. We do 3 different styles of Stellenbosch Cabernet, and both our Riches and our Cab are wines in the portfolio we need so that we can produce the reserve. They allow us access to a wider variety of sites, and to kind of run and test the reserve in different directions, whether it's through oaking or through vineyards or through fermentation directions. And in some seasons, certain blocks stand out and others don't. And that's really where the blending comes in. And that's why, for us, the reserve is about expressing a vintage. And some vintages we'll be doing 400 cases, and other vintages we'll be doing 2,000 cases. And it's purely based on the quality that the vineyards give us in that season and what the final blends come to. So yeah, it's a wine I love making. My whole thought pattern as a winemaker and viticulturist is always about how can we get that reserve better? How can we build in more nuance, build in more depth, build in more length, and just get this wine to really be more of a fine wine than what it already is.
So I was very fortunate to join you recently at the release of your reserve wines, but at this tasting, you also showcased some terroir-specific cabs. Tell me a little bit more about those and the thinking behind it, and where you planning on going with this in the future.
So with our reserve, it takes about 22 different vineyards throughout Stellenbosch to make that wine. Those get split up into about 32 different ferments that ends up making about 40 different batches. So we know that tasting through our barrels, there's this multitude of really unique Cabernets that we have in our cellar. But our clients never get to actually drink it because we never bottle them on their own. It's always, those blends disappear into 3 wines. And although our reserves, we see them as Stellenbosch terroir specific, they're not site specific. I'm not giving you a wine that tastes like the Helderberg or like the Simonsberg or like the alluvial soils in the Jonkershoek Valley, because there's components of them going into the wines. It's not the entire final package. So what we did was, and we've been on this journey now for about 6 years, where we do what we call a small batch series. And it's something only released on our mailing list and onto our cellar door. And it's really small volumes, only 300 bottles of each, but they're there to showcase the different faces of Stellenbosch. So we did for the 2018 vintage, we did what we call the Ocean and Mountain, which was 2 vineyards which are in the lower lying areas, Helderberg coastal area, on the duplex soils that are really impacted by the ocean sea breeze, versus 2 vineyards, one high up in Jonkershoek at 300 meters above sea level, and one at 350 on the Simonsberg mountain, both on deep decomposed granite soils, and they both sitting more towards the north of Stellenbosch. And we put those vineyards together as an ocean component and a mountain component, bottled them separate, and you could clearly see mountain terroir versus ocean terroir. And then since then, we've been looking at different iterations. But for 2021, we did a Simonsburg single vineyard. And then we did 2 single vineyards from one of the most southern vineyards in Stellenbosch. It sits right on False Bay. One low-lying bush vine block, which we call the bush vine Cabernet, and then one further up the slope at about 80 meters above sea level, which has been one of our main components of the reserve for many years, which is our Stainsrust single vineyard. So they're really there to just showcase the diversity of terroir that Stellenbosch has. And every year we look at what the season gave us. We look at which vineyards worked, which didn't. Some years, Cabernet as a single vineyard just doesn't look as good. And other seasons like 2021, there's a multitude of wines they've got the complexity to stand as single vineyards again. So it's really just, we'll pick and choose in a season, and we'll try and do something smaller that expresses that season for us, but through 100% Cabernets.
Nice. I really enjoyed those wines, and I thought, it's such a clever way of showcasing. I almost want to say the raw product, but the terroir and where it comes from, and breaking it down. So if you're listening to this, get onto that mailing list. So Christo, I'm gonna be bold and take Cabernet Sauvignon as a category out of this following question. But as a consumer, when you're drinking wine, what do you drink, excluding Cab Sav?
Well, that is extremely seasonally dependent. I was thinking now that I was drinking my reserve in January and I didn't like it at all. Where at the moment I can't get enough of it. And it's purely because we're now in the middle of winter. It's cold, my body wants warmer, richer, fuller wine. So at the moment I'm definitely drinking a little bit more aged. I actually had a great bottle of the Trafford Syrah from 2015 vintage, which was delicious. But if I look at my cellar, what I have and what I'm buying, there's always some Bordeaux busy aging. I would have more Napa Cab if I could afford it, but it's just not affordable and not available in our country. I really enjoy Nebbiolos. I really enjoy the wines of Rioja. I've been known to dibble a little bit into the Rhone. I don't say it out loud because it's kind of frowned upon with my career path. But I do enjoy it, and my family hates Rhone, where I love it. So it's always an interesting one. And then obviously Burgundy Pinots. Pinots are beautiful. I probably prefer more old world Pinots than new world Pinots. Mm-hmm. White wines point of view, I'm loving Chenin from South Africa. I think it's such a beautiful and diverse category with wines that are really going to age. Bordeaux white, whether it's coming from, let's say, Cape Point Vineyards, Islay, or Vergelegen or Tukara, those when they have 10 years of aging on them, or even your classic from the classic Bordelais, if in the Pessac Leonan or one of those beautiful regions. The wines age so well, and it's been one of the greatest bottles I've ever had was a Coste, so now white. I didn't like the red, but the white was much more impressive. So some good Rieslings, always delicious. Really like the Gruners, Veltliners from the Wachau. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of hard to pinpoint it down to one specific direction. I think there's so many beautiful wines out there, and it's always about exploring. But I'm not a big fan of major fruit in a wine. I want restraint and I want savoriness in a wine. It needs to be food friendly. So it's there in the New World where they get that. I love it, and that's why I'm loving our Chenins at the moment. But I probably have a palate that leans a little bit more to that more savory old world style that can really, really age well.
Mm-hmm. So you are telling us about all these amazing wines that you enjoy and love. I will therefore assume that maybe on one or more than one occasion you might have overindulged. And therefore I would like to know whether you have any hangover cures that you might want to share with us.
Oh, wow. Unfortunately not. The closer I get to 40, the more I realize that drinking too much is not a pleasure the next morning, especially if you have a toddler running around the house. So it's one of those where a toddler is probably the best hangover cure because they get you out of your bed. But you'll regret it for the rest of your day. And then you realize that I'll stop a little bit earlier next time around because it's just not worth it the next morning. But yeah, unfortunately not. It's one of those that just drink enough soda water and you're good to go during the night to avoid dehydration.
Yeah, and hope for the best the next day with a toddler. So some people read tea leaves in the bottom of a cup to tell the future, predict what the future holds. If perchance you could read what the sediment at the bottom of a wine glass were to say for the future of Riche wines, what do you think they would tell you? We're actually busy discussing that at the moment. No, for me, our future is more Cabernet. And really just honing in on the reserve. We're at maximum capacity in the cellar, so we can't really, and we don't want to grow much bigger than what we are at the moment. But I think we've got a lot of scope to be able to just nail down the vineyards that I'm busy with, and we've been on that journey now for a good 6 or 7 years of finding sites that are really uniquely expressive, and then setting up long-term contract with our farmers for those. And then just being able to make more reserve, because the problem with 10,000 bottles of wine is that there's hardly any that goes out there. So we really just want to grow the volume on the wine, obviously without sacrificing quality. But by bringing in more vineyards from around Stellenbosch, and the sites are there. There's a multitude of them. And so 20 years from now, hopefully I'll be at about 60,000 bottles of reserve. Which will be a kind of then you'll actually find the wine in a multitude of countries, which is the main idea. But other than that, we might actually make fewer wines than what we make. We might only do the reserve in 20 years from time. So yeah, we're not going to change much. We're not going to do too much different. We don't expect much of a different style. I think we've got a lot of space still to work with in terms of climate change. The ocean impact is amazing. The big question mark will be water. We're already making changes viticulturally for that, so that we can make sure that we're using very water-wise methods in how we're looking at our vineyards, the rootstocks we're working with, irrigation planning, how we design a vineyard block. All those kind of decisions are there to optimize water use. But yeah, from there onwards, there's not much going to change here for the foreseeable future. Good stuff. So looking back to the past, when you were a little boy, say 5-6-year-old Christo running around on the farm, what did you want to be? Or did you always know you were coming into this family business?
I had a small little venture into wanting to be a game ranger. The Riches our family actually come from the Kalahari, and we were very involved in the establishment of the Kalahari National Park. Actually, there was Riches managing the park from 1930 until 1994. So that's kind of my history and our greater family legacy over the last 150 years. But I very quickly realized that it's a passion project, more so than winemaking, and I'm going to struggle to feed a family of 4. And secondly, if you love nature, being in the wine trade is a beautiful place to be. I mean, as a viticulturist, the amount of time you spend out in the vineyards and on the farms, it's basically what you're doing. You're working with the biology, you're working with soil, you're working with nature. I quite quickly realized that wine had the diversity of skill sets that would keep me interested. It had aspects of marketing, business, science. Obviously, it's a nice people in the trade. It's a great industry to be part of. So, yeah, it was quite early that I was set on my direction. So by the time of 16, I knew exactly where I wanted to go. Went to Stellenbosch University and then, joined the family business when I was about 27 after traveling to various countries.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how many winemakers say they wanted to become game rangers when they were little. It's incredible. There must be a very, very clear and distinctive link behind kind of nature and the outdoors. It's probably one of my favorite questions, and I kind of ask it always thinking, oh, am I going to get this? 90%. 90%, I would say. So when you're not busy in the vineyards or in the cellar, what else takes up your free time other than chasing around after toddlers?
Ooh, wow. Okay, so let's not talk about the last 3 years. Let's go before that. But no, I've always been passionate about the ocean. That's really where my great love is. So whether it was fishing with my dad from a really young age, or my biggest hobby and pastime is surfing. So I've always been in or out of the ocean in some way or form. And then lately I've really got into spearfishing as well, which has been great fun. It's kind of a new challenge. I love being underwater, and just being at depth is such an amazing experience. And we've got these beautiful oceans to play in around here. They're raw and they're rough, but it's just spectacular to be in the ocean. Yeah, so that really is where my passion's always been, and I just love being out in nature. I dabbled with a bit of rock climbing for quite a while as well, but then I quickly realized my fingers were going to give me a lot of arthritis when I get old. So now it's down to just kind of doing a light walk in the mountains every now and then.
I don't blame you, for sure. And music, are you into music? Any favorite genres or singers or groups that you're particularly into? Books, movies, what else floats your boat?
I'm not very good at calling out different bands, and that's basically because I love putting on the radio and hearing what comes out. Whether the genre is coming in from country to chamber music to little bits of opera here and there. My mum was a ballet teacher, so my exposure to the classics has been quite wide. My dad, on the other hand, will listen to a little bit of Afrikaans music if he ever does listen to it. I love obviously a little bit of Jack Johnson, the old classics from the 70s, Dire Straits. There's quite a variety, so it's hard to pinpoint one or two. But yeah, basically my wife already knows it's really just about putting on the radio and just having a diversity of genres coming at me. But I always have something on. I love having music in the background. Then, from a book point of view, I married an American who's into publishing, and she's all about doing young adult fantasy. So I love a fantasy book. I luckily enjoy reading the books that she works on as well. Definitely much more of a fantasy genre, sci-fi genre reader than what I am into fiction or thrillers, that whodunit kind of direction. I think that would kind of be the main direction.
You mentioned your wife. If you were to really take her out for dinner and spoil her with a wine that you know she would enjoy, what would you order?
That would probably be going into something a little bit lighter. So whether it's a really well-aged Cabernet, 15 to 20 years old, that she really enjoys. Oh yes, I can't forget this one. But the big love is bubbles. Bubbles in any shape and any form is really what she's passionate about. So not necessarily going towards champagne. A good MCC will also do it, but the main force will be, it has to be brut, it has to be dry, and she loves a good bottle of Grain Beck as well.
A girl after my own heart, for sure. Christo, what would you say has been the best piece of advice you've ever received? Or maybe to phrase it differently, if you had to give a 15-year-old Christo a piece of advice, what would you say?
It's probably just looking back to kind of my dad's philosophy on life, which is basically relax. I'm very much more like my mom, very type A. I love detail. I love being in control. Where my father is someone who's much more relaxed and laid back, and he goes on gut feel. And the older I get, the more I become comfortable with following that gut feel. Unfortunately, it needs to come with experience. So even for a 15-year-old myself, I'd have to say, gain the knowledge, but in the end, go with your gut. Once you actually have that knowledge in your background, learn to use your gut and just relax and let the process flow.
That's a very good piece of advice, and actually one that I can relate to, because I share that type A personality, and sometimes you just need to kind of remind yourself to just don't sweat the small stuff. Just take a step back and take a breath and realize what's important in the bigger picture. Great advice. If you could share any bottle of wine from anywhere in the world with anyone in the world, alive or dead, what wine would you choose, and who would you want to share it with?
Wow. Anywhere in the world from any time. That's a very, very long period of time. Wow. Honestly, a jug of wine with the 12 disciples and Jesus would probably have been quite an amazing experience to sit around the table, and just to see that level of friendship that kind of kick-started the entire Christian faith on that one evening. Must have been an absolutely amazing experience. And we know they drank wine. What they drank, I've got no idea, but it was in a jug. So that would probably be first choice. Well, from there out, there's obviously Nelson Mandela is such an interesting character, and just to see, and if you can actually include him and Steve Biko and the great kind of thought leaders of the ANC within the South African context, and just to understand how and why they made the decisions they made, and were able to kind of guide South Africa in the direction that we've gone, must also be such a great experience. And then I would just sit down with a good bottle of old Cab Cinsault from Zonneblom, probably, which was made in that era, or a good bottle of the GS Cab, and be able to sit down with those great minds, and or even have Nelson Mandela and Evie de Klerk sitting down and listen, and just seeing how that interaction played out, because it was such diversity that came together and was able to mold into a unifying agent, that it must be quite a spectacular minds and special minds that can do that, and have the humility to be able to not hammer their own point and listen to the other party's side of stuff.
Yeah. I think, just sitting in that conversation, just enjoying a good glass of wine, and even seeing perhaps a different side, just not even talking about the political landscape, just them as people, and having a laugh next to a bride. I think that would be a pretty cool experience. Very, very nice. So looking forward to the future, what kind of wines do you think will be drunk in, say, the year 2300?
Oh, wow. I hope not too much change. There's something about wine and its resistance to change over generations, which is so beautiful about it. If you think about Burgundy doing Pinot Noir since the 800s, since for 800 years it has been planted there, or being able to drink Syrah from Lebanon, that's been in that area, or from Syria, that's been in that environment for so many years. And I think that's a lot of what the romance of wine is the history that comes with every bottle, because it's not the vintage you're drinking today. You're drinking today's vintage and you're comparing it to all the years back. We recently did a tasting of Madeiras, and we drank back to 1812, I think was the oldest wine, and the wine is still spectacular. And back then, there was someone who made a decision, I'm going to make this wine and I'm not going to sell all of it. And they give someone 200 years later the opportunity to taste that wine. And there's something special about that. Sharing a bottle of wine that Napoleon had, one of the Constantia wines. Or there's so much beauty in that. So I hope we don't change too much. Obviously, there's the necessity of what's going on around environment and people and how that all influences. It would be amazing if we could focus in on new cultivars which we could cross and actually get something that's a little bit more disease resistant in the various areas. The reality is the wine market doesn't like us changing cultivars. It's not table grapes where we do that every day. So there's space for something new. But I would love to see the old remain and just be more fine-tuned, because that's really where beauty in wine and that detail of terroir and understanding comes from over generations.
I agree with you. I really do hope not too much changes, and that what we're experiencing and enjoying today will still be available for future generations. Is there a winemaking area in the world? I know you've traveled extensively. You went through a period where you worked in vineyards around the world. But are there any regions that you haven't yet explored but really are on your bucket list of wanting to go to learn a little bit more?
Wow. I'd love to go to the Golan Heights in Israel, purely because of the way they work with water, and just their detail and being able to make some beautiful wines without much access to anything. I really want to see Central Otago. I just think it must be such a beautiful country. New Zealand's always been a space I wanted to travel to. And then the last one would probably be Patagonia. Visiting Hans Vindingdeer in Patagonia and tasting the wines, but seeing the country as well, and just that raw, rugged beauty that is the environment there.
That's an interesting one, Patagonia. I haven't really thought of that. Very good. Okay, we're about done. However, before I finish, I'd like to play a little game with you. So, I am going to name 3 cultivars, and I'd like you to pair each of them with a song or a genre or an music artist that you think represents that specific variety. Okay. So it would be a miss to not go with Cab Sav.
So Cab Sav for me is Piano Man. It's a song that was playing during my vintage at Thelema. My German friend who I was working with back then whistled it throughout the cellar the whole day long. And so that song definitely is my association with Cab, would be Piano Man.
Okay. Let's go with Chenin Blanc.
There I would go with chamber music, to be honest. Probably something a little bit more classical, and focused around piano work without vocals. Just because I think there's this, you can go into various crescendos, it's got various directions you can move towards, but it's got this lovely elegance and linearity about it. But there's a little bit of width to it as well every now and then. So I'd probably do go in somewhere in that direction.
Very nice, yes. Okay, let's finish off with Pinot Noir.
There I'm actually thinking, for me, Pinots are, there's something inspirational, but there's something in the beauty and the delicacy behind it. So if you use somebody like Pretty Yendes and her voice, which is a beautiful South African soprano, but singing something that is just as a beautiful melody to it, actually possibly something from Old English, in a kind of that kind of vocals would be. Yeah, I think that's kind of where I'd go with Pinots. And it also brings me back to my first vintage, which was with Peter Finlayson at Bushard Finlayson. And he is the kind of winemaker who would walk through the cellar singing opera as well. So there's very much that link back to that kind of style of music as well, with a variety for me.
That is really lovely. And I've now got this image of Peter walking through his cellar singing opera. Thanks for that. Christo, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, learning a little bit more about Le Riche, your wines, and of course yourself. But before we finish off, please can you share with our listeners where they can find you online, on social media, or reach out to you if they have any more questions?
So social media, it's Christo at Le Riche. And that's also basically our website. So anything that has to do with Le Riche wines, just add a Christo before that and you'll get hold of me. .co.za.
Thank you so much, and have a lovely day.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack South Africa. For details and updates, visit our website winesoundtrack.com.